Welcome back to Hard Knocks. The show where we really dig deep into all the nitty-gritty of progression football. And today we're tackling something I think every manager struggles with at some point, and that's player evaluation. Like, how do you scout future stars? How do these guys actually progress or sometimes, regress? And what does that OVR number really mean anyway?
Yeah, that OVR can be a tricky one. And we're going to be pulling back the curtain using the official Progression Football Wiki. So get ready to level up your team building game, you know?
All right, so let's set the stage. You're on the clock at the draft, right? Got a whole list of potential rookies, but how do you know who's worth the pick?
Well, that's where scouting comes in. In Progression Football, you can actually purchase different types of scouts.
Oh, really? So
Yeah,
some scouts are better than others.
exactly. You'll find some that are, budget friendly,
Okay.
but they may not be as precise, in their evaluations. Then you've got those more expensive scouts, the ones with a higher confidence level.
So it's like you're kind of choosing between quantity and quality of reports.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Some players will really go for volume, so they'll buy multiple cheap scouts and just accept that there's going to be a little more risk involved.
Yeah.
But then others are all about accuracy, so they invest in a few top-tier scouts.
I was looking at the wiki and I actually saw an example where a scout with I think it was 82% confidence gave three totally different OVR evaluations for the same player.
Yeah.
So even with that high confidence level, there's still some guesswork involved.
Oh, yeah. There's always an element of uncertainty in scouting. It's a strategic game,
Mhm.
right? You assign your scout to a region, you pick which players you want to evaluate,
Right.
and then you can either wait for that weekly report or, if you're impatient like me, you can use the Scout Now feature for those immediate results.
All right, so let's say you've made your picks, you've drafted your team, but these players, they don't just stay the same, do they?
Nope, they sure don't. Every player comes in with what's called a raw OVR. Basically, it's their base skill level, and that can actually change each season.
Okay, so their rating goes up or down.
Exactly. So you've got a percentage chance for a few different outcomes.
Yeah.
Big progression, just regular progression, no change, regression, and then, well, there's big regression too.
Oh no, so
Yeah.
what are we talking about here? How much does the OVR actually change with each of these outcomes?
All right, so a big progression, that's a nice boost, adds like 5 to 7 OVR points. A regular progression, you're looking at 1 to 4 points. Now, no change, well, that means the OVR stays the same. Pretty self-explanatory.
Right.
But then on the flip side, you've got regression. That's a drop of 1 to 4 points. And big regression, ooh, that's a tough one. That'll slash 5 to 7 points off their OVR.
Wow. So you're saying a star player could suddenly become just average or even worse?
It happens. But hey, on the bright side, a late round pick could suddenly blossom into a superstar.
It's unpredictable. But is there any way to control this wild swing in OVR?
Well, there is an upgrade that teams can invest in. It's called the progression cap.
Progression cap.
Yeah, it limits how much your players can progress.
Oh, so you can basically put a ceiling on how good they get.
Right. But remember, it only affects progression, not regression.
Ah, so there's still that downside risk.
Exactly. You can control the upside, but you can't totally eliminate that downside risk.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's go back to the wiki example. So if my progression cap is set to let's say +3, and one of my players hits a big progression, which would normally be +5, they only gain +3, right?
Precisely. You got it.
Okay, good. So there are base chances for each of these outcomes. But what I'm hearing is that there are other factors that can influence those chances.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Things like age, team culture fit, if your coach has any development boosts, even free agency status can play a role.
It's funny, the wiki also mentioned that players who are actually drafted by their current team, they get a progression boost. So it pays to be loyal, even in virtual football.
Loyalty matters. But now that we've talked about raw OVR and how it can change, what does that number actually mean in the game? Like, how does it translate to performance on the field?
Right, because you keep saying raw OVR, so I'm guessing there's more to the story.
There is. So raw OVR is really just the foundation. It's their base skill level without any extra bonuses or penalties.
So is there like a good OVR, or is it all relative?
That's a great question. So to get the complete picture, you need to consider what's called total OVR, and that includes all sorts of bonuses.
Bonuses, like what kind of bonuses?
Oh, things like team chemistry, coaching boosts, team culture, it all adds up.
Okay, so total OVR is like raw OVR plus all the good stuff.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because the maximum raw OVR, that tops out at 99.
99, okay.
But with all those bonuses factored in, total OVR can actually reach 109.
Wow, 109. Okay, so a player with like a total OVR of 90, that's got to be pretty impressive, right?
Oh, absolutely. But here's the thing. It's not the only factor to consider when you're evaluating players.
Really? So OVR isn't everything.
It's a quick and easy way to compare players, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. You see, a player with a lower OVR might actually have certain attributes that make them way more valuable in your team's scheme. You got to look beyond that single number.
So you're saying you got to look deeper.
You got it. It's about understanding the individual attributes, the specific strengths and weaknesses of each player.
Okay, so if I were going into the draft in progression football and knowing everything we've talked about, like how would my strategy change?
Well, that's a $1 million question, isn't it?
Yep.
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, well, first of all, I definitely wouldn't skimp on scouting. I think having like a couple of high confidence scouts, even if it means getting fewer reports overall, would be totally worth it.
Prioritizing accuracy over quantity. Smart move.
Right. And honestly, I might even scout some key players multiple times, just to get a sense of their potential range.
That's a great idea. It helps you minimize that uncertainty we talked about earlier.
Exactly. And then when I'm actually making those draft picks, I wouldn't just rely on OVR alone. I'd really dig into those individual attributes. Look for players who fit my team's specific needs and who, have room to grow.
It's like you're saying you're not just drafting players, you're building a team.
Exactly.
And don't forget about those other factors we mentioned like age, team culture fit, coaching boosts.
Right. All that stuff really matters.
It can make a huge difference in a player's development. Imagine you've got two players with similar OVRs, but one is younger and a better fit for your team culture. That could be the deciding factor.
It's all about potential.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'd keep an eye out for those players with, maybe slightly lower OVRs, but high potential for those big progressions, the underdog stories.
Yeah, I love those.
Finding those hidden gems, it's all about balancing that immediate impact with long-term potential. That's the heart of dynasty building,
You're speaking my language.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on, is there anything else about OVR that we haven't touched on? Anything we should know?
Well, there's one point that's often overlooked. It's the difference in OVR calculation for offensive and defensive players.
Wait, what? So a 90 OVR quarterback isn't necessarily equivalent to a 90 OVR linebacker?
You got it. The formula actually emphasizes certain attributes more heavily depending on the player's position.
Oh, okay. I'm with you. So, for example, for quarterbacks, throwing accuracy is going to be weighted more heavily.
Exactly. Versus like tackling or coverage for defensive players.
Fascinating. It's like there's this whole other layer of complexity to player evaluation.
There is. And that's why it's so important to understand the nuances of OVR. It's a valuable tool, but it's not the whole picture.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you got to consider the context. Look at the specific attributes and really think about how each player fits into your overall strategy.
Exactly. That's what separates good teams from great teams.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into player evaluation in progression football. I feel like I've learned so much.
Thank you.
We've covered scouting, progressions, regressions. We really went deep into that whole world of OVR. But before we wrap up, any final advice for our listeners who are out there, trying to build their dream teams?
Don't be afraid to experiment. Test different scouting strategies, play around with different team compositions, find what works best for you. Because progression football, it's a game of long-term planning,
Right.
strategy. So embrace the journey.
Love that. So finding that sweet spot between immediate impact and that long-term potential, experimenting with different strategies, that really makes you think.
It does.
All right, folks. Well, that concludes our Hard Knocks deep dive into player evaluation in progression football. Hopefully you all gained some valuable insights into scouting, the exciting but often unpredictable nature of progressions and regressions. And of course, the ever-important, yet not all-encompassing, OVR.
It's not just about the numbers, right? It's about building a team, cultivating talent, and making those crucial strategic decisions that lead to victory.
Beautifully said. Thank you for joining us, everyone. And hey, be sure to check out the Progression Football Wiki for even more in-depth information. Until next time, keep those scouting reports coming and those OVRs soaring. If you've enjoyed this podcast and want to become part of the action, then head over to progressionfootball.com to jump in an existing league or even create your own. Plenty of stats for limitless debates.